18 is on board right now. Edward is commanding, joined by Yuri, as well as Gregory, who's a pretty old resident on board. He's been up there for about 6 months now. He's going to be replaced by Sandra. She's going to get dropped off for a 4-month stay on board the ISS. Now, that's what's going on today. The room directly beneath us is controlling the International Space Station, and the room down the hall from that one, as you can see on the TV screens, is controlling the Shuttle Endeavour and their flight. Now, the very first mission commanded out of this room is Gemini 4. All these patches here on the bottom are all Gemini missions. The Gemini 4 patch is the American flag at the front of the room. The mission was made famous by Ed White, you can see him here, performing the very first American EVA, Extra Vehicular Activity, aka spacewalk. Now, the purpose of the Gemini program was to prepare us for the journeys to the moon. We needed to practice everything that would be required of us on that trip in the safety of low Earth orbit first. Walking in space, docking in space, changing our orbit consistently and accurately. I gotta make sure we do that because when we take a 250,000-mile arrow shot out to an area of space where there's nothing yet, there will be 4 days later, you pass by the moon about 60 miles, get slung shot around the back side and shot back towards Earth. You don't want to miss because, well, you end up orbiting the sun instead. Now, that's called free return trajectory, getting slung shot around the back side. All missions to the moon use that method. So in order to stay, they'd have to actually burn an engine to slow down and then burn another engine to get back home. But of course, that was after a long checklist was done both by the people giving mission control and the astronauts on board the spacecraft, making sure that everything would work and burn to return home to the Earth. Now, after the Gemini program is over, we are going to go on to the Apollo. The Apollo is going to be the spacecraft that's going to take us to the moon. Now, the first couple flights, the first flight did not take us to the moon. It was a test of the actual spacecraft in Earth orbit on Apollo 7, which is in the top row there, as you can see at the very front of the room. And it goes all the way to Apollo 17, that is one patch past the H-14 pillar. Now, the very first time we went to the moon was at the very end of that tumultuous year of 1968. Apollo 8. Frank Borman, Bill Anders, and Jim Lovell were the very first human beings to enter into lunar orbit on December the 25th, 1968. They were the very first human beings ever to get to see our home in its entirety, a nice little blue and white ball in the inky blackness of space. Everything that we have ever known, all 7 continents, all 7 oceans, and all 6 billion of us can be covered with your thumb when you're 250,000 miles away from the Earth. Now, they were the first, but certainly not the last people to see our home in its entirety. But before we can go send people to the moon again, we need to test out the brand new lunar lander. It has just got off the assembly line, LEM 3, named Spider by the Apollo 9 crew. They traveled into Earth orbit to test out the lunar lander. Now, the lunar lander is a 2-stage spacecraft. Unfortunately, my version of the lunar lander does not actually work. It's very, very small, and the bottom portion has been lost by kids long ago before I ever started working here. Now, this top portion that you see here, this is the ascent stage. This is where you and someone else would stand. That's right, stand. There is no room for chairs. They weigh too much. There is fuel for thrusters, for steering, as well as an engine to get you off the lunar surface. This entire assembly will be attached to a lower assembly, the copper foil part with the legs. I know my hand doesn't look like that, but hey, it's all I got. And that touches down the lunar surface using its own descent engine. Now, it's going to be very close to running out of fuel, not nearly enough to lift off the entire assembly back up to lunar orbit. So you detach, use the descent stage as a launch pad, and return to lunar orbit to dock with the command and service module, where the command module pilot has been keeping a vigil. And then you can dock, let's see, there we go, and then you can return home to the Earth after you've transferred all the cargo back over and jettison this, and it returns and crashes on the moon. So that's how the LEM works, and we practice all of these things on Apollo 9. On Apollo 10, our second trip to the moon, we brought the LEM with us. We brought it down to 50,000 feet above the lunar surface. Its number was 4, its name was Snoopy, and the command module's name was Charlie Brown. Back in those days, the spacecraft were only one-shot vehicles, so the crews could name them what they liked, like Spider and Gumdrop. Gumdrop was the command module's name of Apollo 9. They named it that because when it showed up in the assembly building, when the astronauts first saw it, it was wrapped up in this blue-green saran wrap-like material to protect it during transit from where it was being built all the way to the Cape. And so, well, they named it Gumdrop because that's what they thought it looked like. Now, Spider and Snoopy, LEMs 3 and 4, answered a lot of questions for us, but not the biggest question of all. we land on the moon. It's up to Lem 5, also known as the Eagle, and the crew of Apollo 11 to answer it. On July 20th, 1969, at 3:18 p.m. Central Standard Time, we got our answer. The words crossed 250,000 miles, all the way from the Sea of Tranquility back here to Houston, Texas, to Capcom, where Charlie Duke was sitting. He and everyone else in this room heard the first words spoken from the lunar surface. Houston, Tranquility Base here, Eagle has landed. To which Charlie responded, Roger, Tranquility, we copy on the ground. We have a bunch of guys about to turn blue down here. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. Referring to the collective breath that was being held in this room, as if landing on the lunar surface for the first time in human history was not enough, 60 seconds prior to landing on the moon, a low-level light warning went off, indicating they had about a minute of fuel left. Gene Kranz, who is the flight director, sits here, center stage, the boss of all bosses. No one can override the flight director, not the commander of the spacecraft in flight, not even the President of the United States. He ordered no calls out except for fuel remaining, and the countdown began. They got all the way down to 30 seconds. Gene told Charlie, Capcom, a fellow astronaut, the person that gets to talk to the astronauts, tell them to land or abort now because they are about to run out of fuel. And before Charlie could make the transmission, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had touched down on the lunar surface in Mare Tranquilitas, the Sea of Tranquility, with anywhere between 17 to 3 seconds of fuel remaining in their fuel tanks. Now, first of all, the reason why we don't know the exact amount is because, well, we can try and time it. We know how much the engines and the pumps are supposed to use, but you never know. It can be off by a few seconds here or there. And they were getting very close to empty, so it was anywhere between 17 to 3 seconds. So if you ever hear they had 15 seconds of fuel left, 13 seconds of fuel left, that's because we don't know for sure. That's that particular person's best guess. Now, second of all, they are not stranded. I get this question almost every time I tell the story. No, Neil, Buzz, and Mike, can't forget him, even though he didn't get to walk on the moon. Apollo 11 would not have been possible without him. Are all alive, home, safe here on the Earth. So they are not stranded. Remember, they used the ascent stage engine to lift them off the lunar surface. So that's how they got back into lunar orbit. Now that being said, we barely made it to the moon on Apollo 11. Now we sent 6 more flights to go and land on the moon. A total of 9 flights went there. 2 of them were test flights. So 8 and 10, 11 through 17 were all landing missions. 24 people have traveled to the moon. 3 of them twice. It's, now I went down 27, and it's 24. Lucky guys, right? Well, out of those 7 flights that got to land on the moon, only one of them did not get to land. Or, I'm sorry, out of the 7 flights that were sent to go and land on the moon, one of them did not get to land. Again, all crews returned home safely to the Earth because of the people working here in mission control. Now, the crew that did not get to land on the moon faced a disaster 200,000 miles away from home in a dangerous and perilous journey back. When they did return home safely to the Earth, they gave a gift to all the flight control staff. It is here, this nice little gray mirror in the golden frame above the water fountain. Underneath that mirror, the plaque states, this mirror flown on Aquarius, Lunar Module 7, to the moon, April 11th to 17th, 1970. Returned by a grateful Apollo 13 crew to reflect the image of the people in mission control who got us back. Signed Jim Lovell, John Swigert, and Fred Hayes. Now, quite personally, I cannot think of a better, nicer, and indeed clever way of saying thanks, guys, for saving our lives. Clever because, well, they hung it over the water fountain. Anytime any one of the average age 26-year-old flight controllers got a drink of water from there, they'd have their image reflected in the mirror. Alright guys, before we run out of time together, take this opportunity now to take any questions that you might have. Anything and everything you've ever wanted to know, been too afraid to ask about manned space flight, past, present, or even perhaps the future, go ahead, overcome your fears, raise your hand. I will do my best to answer your questions. It's funny that she should say that. I have another speech that has a lengthy story that tells the reason why. Long story short, Lyndon B. Johnson. He was the vice president of the Medical program and didn't want it in here. So it is here. The next trip to the moon, 2018, latest 2020. That's when we're planning on going back using the Orion and the Altair lander. And we're not going to go up there just to stay for like a day and a half. We're going to stay there say for a week at first, and then we're going to build lunar outposts during these first few days, so we can rotate crews out every 6 months, much related to the space station. To learn how to live on another celestial body, so we can go to Mars by 2030 and live there. Any other questions, folks? To Mars? To the moon?
Yeah.
We're going to use 2 rockets, one to lift the Orion into space, it's called the Ares 1, an improved launch vehicle, and the Ares 5 will be the heavy lift vehicle. It will be 10 feet taller than the Saturn V rocket. It will lift into space a rocket engine as well as the lunar lander, and that will be the Earth departure stage, and the Orion will link up, dock with the lunar lander, which is on top of the Earth departure stage, and the entire assembly will then ignite that engine and burn the balloon. So we're going to meet in Earth orbit with the lander and the engine that will take us there, and then go to the moon.
Where's the new control center?
It is on the 2nd floor, on the other side of the building, 100 feet away from us. One last one, folks. Anybody else have one other question? Yes. Why haven't we gone back? Well, the thing is, money. We don't have enough money. If we could operate the shuttle program and missions to the moon, yeah, we could. We just don't have enough money. Congress cut the budget for the Apollo program, and they gave us a little bit of money for the shuttle program to keep on going with manned spaceflight to develop the shuttle. And then we finally got the space station pretty well built.
Sí.
And
Nada más
now
ponla
we're
en,
going to go back to the moon after that's all.
en cámara. Ahorita están
So one of the reasons
grabando
why they
video.
canceled the continuing mission